Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, today we're going to be discussing mergers and acquisitions and their deal structures. I'm super excited to be moderating this session with my esteemed colleagues here. We have Lukas Krause right beside me. He's the CEO of SkyRun Vacation Rentals. We also have Elizabeth Sickels. She is the CEO of Elizabeth Maora. And we have Stephanie Samels. She is the VP of Investments for StoicLane. And last but not least, we have Steve Milo, and he is the CEO of Vtrips. Today we're going to talk a little bit about kind of where mergers and acquisitions look like today, what the deal structures look like today, because it is much different today than it really was 24 months ago. The last 2 years of 2021, 2022 was just insane froth in the market. There was incredible exposure from homeowners, investors, entrepreneurs, and guests alike. And price discovery was pretty challenging during those times, the kind of the roller coaster times. And today it looks like we're reverting a little bit back to the mean of kind of 2019 levels, maybe a little bit higher than that. But for this, we'll talk through what some of the criteria is that these groups look at as they're looking at sourcing deals. We'll talk about how they determine valuations of companies, and then we'll walk through kind of how they structure the deals with the old adage of you name the price, we'll name the terms type of thing. So without further ado, I guess we'll start from Steve over there in the corner. Would you like to talk about some of the criteria that Vtrips looks for when they're looking at it, potentially evaluating a deal? It could be from geography, interest, unit count size, profitability. What are some of the things that Vtrips looks at?
Well, great question. So we've been doing M&A for 8-9 years. And I have to say, when I first did it, I did things differently than I do now. And we kind of learned along the way. So the first thing we really focus in on is the market. Is this a market we really want to be in? And we use analytics to determine that market. And part of that market is it a market where there's growth? Another factor we've recently started to calculate within the last couple of years is labor. Is labor constraint, or is there the ability to service what you're going to get? Is inventory growing or shrinking? So just the macro, right? So just do we want to go in that market, and how big is that potential market? Then we're looking at the companies within that market. We want to buy one of the leading companies within that market, and they have to be profitable, and that has to be a brand that has some brand equity. So just from just a snapshot, those are some of the things we're looking at. I mean, there's a lot more nuances which we can get into.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's great as a kind of high-level snapshot. Stephanie, with StoicLane, how do y'all look about it from kind of a high level when you're evaluating different markets and companies?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thanks, Jacobie. And echoing kind of Steve's comments, we look at kind of all those factors as well. StoicLane is a permanent capital vehicle, so we plan to buy, hold, and grow businesses throughout finance, insurance, and real estate. And when we look at entering a new market, it's really important to us that the team, the local operations, is really strong, because we need all the local team members there. I'm based in Chicago, but if something's wrong in one of our Florida markets, I'm not the one that's going to be going to fix that property. We really need like a really, really stable, strong team in each market. So that's like a really important characteristic, as in addition to some of the comments mentioned, like what factors to consider when entering a new market and such.
Awesome. That's super helpful. Elizabeth, I'm going to skip you just for 1 second, and we'll come right back to you. Lukas, with SkyRun Vacations being a franchise, I'm sure you guys are kind of looking at markets with potential acquisition, but also potential just adding new franchisees. How does your answer kind of look in terms of evaluating new markets and companies?
Yeah, very similar to what's been covered. Because we look at acquisitions two fronts. We have a company-owned arm, and we are acquiring businesses. It's almost the same things you're evaluating, or that's been mentioned before. We also look at it from like a runway perspective, because you try to get that flagship in the market and plant your flag, but are there tuck-in acquisitions, smaller ones, really available? Because the economics can get a lot more attractive there if you also have infrastructure in place. But for our franchisees, it's really helping them navigate it, because it's a growth strategy to get the viability quicker. So there, we're more of a support resource, really helping them, because often they've never done an acquisition, and so it's helping them how to go through the discovery. And I know we'll talk about a lot of the problems, but things to avoid and how to structure a contract to make sure you're not in a terrible position, because it's often that's where you get yourself in trouble, and then there's a lot operationally taken out if you've never done it. And I know we'll cover that a little later.
No, that's great. It is, yes, there's a lot of nuances and moving parts that have to be done very strategically. Elizabeth, you're kind of on the other end of the coin. You've recently sold your company.
It is a great feeling, by the way.
Sold at the peak.
I did.
Hey-o, clap it up. So in terms of the criteria from the other side, how did the buyer kind of come about finding you, and what were some of the things that made them interested in your company?
So they were actually a client of ours. One of the things we specialize in is hosting and management of luxury properties, but then we also nationally we do design and furnishings specifically for short-term rentals. So they were actually one of our clients just on the furnishing side. They were doing self-management. And then my executive director said to me one day, she's like, do you know they manage X amount of properties here already? So I had already had several offers to buy the company, but I reached out to them. And so that's how that started. And I learned a lot. It's not nearly as smooth as what you think it's going to be, even if all of the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and your lawyer and your CPA and other people, very smart people, have read everything, you will still miss things.
Yes, amen to that.
That happened with me anyways.
Okay, super helpful. So everybody, now we've now we've now walked through the criteria. We found a company within a market that we're interested in, ABC Vacation Rentals in Austin, Texas. And so Steve, now you've sent NDAs, you've sent a little request list to this company. They've sent some financials back, some stuff about the company. At that point, how are you looking at evaluating that company, like in terms of a total purchase price for them? Are you looking at a multiple of revenues, of EBITDA? Are you looking at contracts? And what are some of the factors that help either increase that purchase price or decrease it?
I mean, everybody has different ways of valuing, but I think the companies that have been successful and are scaling are looking at profitability. And when I talk about profitability, that means not how much cash you have, but literally your profit and loss. So we're looking at the profit and loss of that company on a yearly basis over a couple-year period of time, and we'll add back depreciation and amortization and maybe owner salary if if they're not really relevant to the business. So and that's critical, because if you're not doing this and you want to sell, you have to have monthly budget, monthly variance, monthly actuals, and you have to do that, because if we do go in and we see these numbers, if we sign an NDA and we start to move forward, we're going to do a quality of earnings, which is going to verify if the numbers you're stating are right by going through all your bank records. And we've had companies mix up cash and think cash was revenue, and that's not the case. So that's one. It's what is your true income? What is your net income? Is it $1 million a year? Whatever it is, we need to make sure that that's accurate. Then the second thing is multiple. And in general, in this industry, there's been some variance of multiples. 4 to 6 is typically where deals land, And those multiples are going to be driven by a number of factors, which each of us may have different criteria, but Stephanie just mentioned the management team. Who are the key employees? How strong are they? Can they take this business and run it? That's maybe a make or break decision if it's not a tuck-in. If it's a tuck-in and you're not really concerned, then that's one thing. Second thing is, are you buying at the end or beginning of season? What kind of software system are you on? We have like 10 different things that we scorecard to come up with the multiple, and then we'll present essentially an offer to the owner of the business.
Awesome. Are you willing to share that scorecard with all of us after here?
Yeah, just see Dylan.
Stephanie, would you like to kind of talk through how StoicLane kind of evaluates the purchase price?
Yeah, so similar. Like we look at the EBITDA of a business and how the business is performing based on like profitability. But then we also look at the type of asset, where the asset is located, the management team, some other like critical factors with running the business. I think kind of we have like a certain level of service that we pride ourselves with. And so anything like below 80 homes in a new market that we're not already in is just going to be tough from like the service perspective to like maintain that quality. So it kind of needs to be above like the 80 homes to make sure that we actually can deliver on what we say and what we're like proud to be delivering on.
Awesome. That's super helpful. And Elizabeth, for you, when the buyer value your company, and obviously if you can't share certain confidential information, that's fine. But what high level wise, how did they look about the valuation of your company?
It's all about the profitability. So I ran a very a lean team. I had a phenomenal team, still have a phenomenal team actually, because they're almost all still with me in a different capacity now. But that's what they want to see. So, excuse me. We never just threw money at marketing. We never just threw money anywhere. Everything was always very, very specific. And what's the ROI? What's the return on investment? I never had any plans of selling. That's why I named my company after my name. I don't ever recommend doing that. But I was able to maintain my name in the sale of it. But those are all things that the more money you're making, the more you're going to get when you sell.
Awesome. And Lukas?
Yeah, I probably don't have a ton new to add, but just, it's interesting, Steve and Stephanie covered a lot of the core, but there's also a big education process. This is probably the one and only time someone's selling. So when you're going through explaining the quality of earnings and why you're poking and prodding them, explain the rationale and why, because it's an emotional thing. The individuals are letting go of their name. Mm-hmm. It's their legacy. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of emotional elements that come into play. So you're educating about also things that maybe get add back or taken out when you're trying to establish what true profitability is. So I found that always as kind of a juggling act through it. And then, the only other thing I'd say factor in with valuation, it being emotional, sometimes people have a number in their head. And it might be outside of that valuation. And what can you do creatively maybe to make that work? And so sometimes it's more creative on an earnout or seller financing or something where you extend the duration where you could get to that number and it's a win-win. Because I have found it's a lot of emotion because it is someone's baby in their life kind of legacy.
And we've found the smaller deals are definitely more difficult to close than the bigger ones. It seems counterintuitive. You would think a bigger deal would be harder, but you're typically dealing with owners who are no longer in the business and they have key employees running it, and that emotional attachment is gone. From a risk standpoint, we like that because we don't have to worry, okay, the owner who's the critical component of this business, what happens when they leave? Yep. Because no matter what an owner says, as soon as that check or the ACH hits their bank account, they're thinking about their trip, whatever they're going to do with this money, and
senioritis.
You have all of this stuff that you have to deal with.
No, that's great. And that
except for with Elizabeth.
I think that segues pretty well into the next topic of the actual second part of this discussion about deal structures. So unfortunately, this is not like selling a home. You're not going to get 100% cash at closing, hand them the keys, and go retire to the beach and sip on Mai Tais the rest of your life. Most of these deals do have some type of structure involved in them, because the assets of these deals are these homeowner contracts with many of these homeowners that can be very fickle and not always are very loyal. So do you all want to talk about kind of how each of your companies looks at the structure or the terms of a deal, and then in terms of kind of following on that with the seller's role post-close? I know y'all hit that a little bit, like how do y'all look at that in terms of a time frame and amount of work they might do? Steve, if you'd like to kind of start with that.
Yeah, again, this goes into our scorecard. So we're looking at your contract. First, it has to be assignable. If it's not assignable, we're probably walking away. So hopefully you're either silent or it says you can assign it. If it says you have to get consent to assign that's probably a deal killer. So make sure that your contract does not have a clause that says you have to get your property owner's permission to assign the contract. The second thing is we're looking at length. We like contracts that are 1 year. We don't like as much 30-day out because there's going to be transition. I mean, there's no question there's going to be transition, and if we have to re-platform them to a new software system, there's disruption. So we want to have, time to show them that we can do this and not just be on such a tight leash. And then we want to see how their contract and their terms measure up to the rest of the market. If they're just discounting below the market, that's never a healthy sign. We'd rather have a company that's getting a premium. That shows that, they've got real stickiness if they're getting a premium in that market. So you don't want to be so much lower than the market that you're basically, it just raises a flag that you may not be that great in terms of holding your owner if you're just so much below the market.
Yeah, and then just to add on, usually there's like cash at close, and then there's also like an earn out or deferred. So that's just like a delayed payment with a few conditions. And maybe like one of those conditions is like a transition period that's like effectively passed off. And the reason why this is the case is like everyone that buys a business would hate for that business to turn into something much smaller over time. Everyone wants it to go bigger over time. And so you need to have that assurance that the company owner will transition appropriately and train the necessary team members to carry on that legacy. So usually like a transition period is like really core and integral to an owner that's looking to step back. And we have like many owners that want to continue working and don't want to kind of leave their business, leave their baby. They just want some cash off the table. And we were like joking earlier that Elizabeth might have gotten the high of the market when she sold, and unfortunately or fortunately, like that is kind of what we're seeing. Like as a whole market, we are seeing like numbers just based on like market demands kind of decrease a bit this year compared to all of last year. And that's just like speaking kind of nationally, not one specific market or anything. But those are some additional like structure for deals that we look at.
Yeah, so what Stephanie is saying is there's really two components. Don't think if you sell your business for $5 million, you're getting $5 million wired on closing. For sure, there's going to be a holdback. And a holdback could be 6 months. And basically, that's to make sure that we're going to do a reconciliation. There's going to be expenses you may have paid after the day of close. There may be stuff that's accrued that is our company. And in some cases, owners may have Airbnb accounts tied to their personal accounts, and there's still cash coming in. And we've got to unwind all of that and make sure all the cash is reconciled. So be very clear that there's going to be a holdback of some period of time just to make sure that we reconcile what's yours, what's ours, and we then release the holdback. And then the other thing that Stephanie said is there's typically, particularly in this market, there's going to be some form of an earn-out that's going to be tied to you as the owner performing at a certain level of transition, maybe continuing to grow the business, et cetera.
And it's tough, like Jacobie mentioned, like it's not like a house, a physical asset that you're buying. With the vacation rental like management companies, it's really just the promise of the contracts that you can rent these homes out. So you just need like more certainty with that. So that's the reason.
Yep, these are ongoing businesses. So to go on Steve's thing, like there will be, it's not a clear cut off and then the next day. So there will be like expenses and revenues that are paid by one party that are owed to the other 30, 60, 90, 6 months later. So that's one component. And then to push you two maybe a little bit further, if y'all are willing, percentage-wise, even ballpark range, how do like a decent company, what percentages are cash at closing and what percentages might be paid out in a contingency or earn out?
I'm going to let Stephanie take that one first.
Just so you guys know, whatever number I'll say, Steve will probably say something higher for like cash at closing. So, just so we get this established. I'd say like 50% cash at closing is something I'd be comfortable with, but it really varies kind of deal to deal.
Yeah, I mean, if you think you're getting 100% at closing again, you have to be realistic. You're selling your business. There's definitely going to be a holdback, so that's going to be X percentage, and then there's going to be some form of earnout that could be a year, could be 2 years, and sometimes the earnout can go up. It's not just a fixed number. So what the win-win is if you, the owner, can actually make more money by doing the things that we need you to do and help us with to transition the business so that it's the most positive situation possible, and then it's a win-win for everyone.
So I have a really probably interesting structure. So I only got 25% down and a 3-year payout, which is great because I get payments once a quarter so far. It did not start out so good, but now it's fantastic. So I mentioned that I kept my name with the business. I also kept, while they technically not bought, but all of my team went with them. But I also had the clause in there that the team could also work part-time for me, so long as it did not interfere with, I have every incentive for them to do very well. So the team still actually gets to work for me also. So it was a really kind of cool, I kept my name, I kept my website, I kept all my social media, all of that, because I have no desire to do property management. I love consulting on it and helping other people do better. So just know, too, that, you can structure deals however you want, because if somebody wants you bad enough, they'll work with you on it. So just always keep that in mind.
Nothing wrong with some mailbox money over a couple years.
And it's great for tax purposes.
Yeah. So not a lot to add, but I think that go into a little more granular, because I think Steve raised some interesting points about, terms if they're under market. And so you have this clawback window and usually tied to either earnings.
You want to explain what a clawback is?
Clawback, so if, let's just say you buy it and it's 100 properties, you valued it on 100 properties. If it goes below and it's 90 properties, that valuation's going down on that last payment. And so this is, exactly where I'm going with it, is if you are trying to bring someone up to market standards and do some of those price changes, you want to do that in that window. But you're also going to be open and explain kind of that with the buyer or the seller, so that you're open book. But that's your window to try to right size if you have a monetization structure that's just off. The other, you hit an interesting one of asset purchase versus buying the entity, right? If it's not assignable, there's things you can do, but it opens up a whole host of risk. And I just figured it was worth a finer point on why it's a non-starter.
Stock deal. So we've only done one stock deal. Everything else has been an asset purchase, and I would not do a stock deal. It's extraordinarily more expensive. Now, maybe Stephanie likes stock deals, but we don't.
Yeah, well, from a tax and a liability standpoint, it adds complications. So, I agree with the assessment. I just thought it would be worth going a little deeper for the group on why it was a non-starter for you.
So, Stephanie, with StoicLane, do they primarily do assets or stock-based deals?
Yeah, we've looked at both asset and stock, yeah.
Okay, nice. All right, well, let's go on to a fun part. Let's talk about some mistakes that have happened before in the past. Everyone loves that. Steve, would you like to kind of start off and maybe one mistake that's happened from a prior deal that you guys might have learned from? You can kind of take it wherever you like there.
Well, this was the first phase where we did quite a bit of M&A in like 2015, and the deals that just blew up on me were the deals where the owner said they didn't want us to meet the key employee until business was sold. And I was dumb. I was so stupid. I'm like, oh, okay. And then we walk in, and it's like, hello, Vtrips just bought you, and people are crying, and it's terrible. It's just the trust is destroyed at this point. Like, the employees have no trust in you. They feel betrayed by the owner of the company. It's the worst situation. So I will never do that again. We have to have the ability to communicate with the key employees, talk about their role in the company, their compensation, what their expectations are, get a sense of what's important to them. And we're typically looking for more than one key employee. We really want to have a team, and we want to get to know the team, and for them to feel like, okay, the owner's leaving, but there's a transition. You can't. It's just a terrible mistake to just come in and it's a surprise, and it blew up on us the couple times we did it.
Yeah, something that we have had an issue with is we were doing a tuck-in, meaning less than the 80 homes, so less than like the amount that we're comfortable with, like the quality of service that we're able to commit to. And we were supposed to be integrating the business into another business, and kind of the leader focused on integrating both of them was not on the same page as kind of the rest of the team, and the owner of the smaller company kind of left and wasn't really willing to help out with the transitionary period and very flexible. And so it just got to be like really out of control, where the tuck-in then kind of like the homeowners were not pleased. And the last thing we would want is where the homeowners kind of leave and are not pleased with the new owner. And so kind of lesson learned that for any tuck-in or smaller business that we're bringing into another company, we just have to be like really sharp and structured and approach it like very, very, very slowly and thoughtfully.
For me, one of the biggest issues I had was I did not have in the contract that if things started going south with the business, because they bought everything, including my team, that I couldn't take the company back over. And I was at a point after they took over, it was a well-oiled machine. Like, I handed them everything, including great teammates, and they just, it went downhill really fast. And so I was scrambling, trying to think, oh my gosh, how am I going to take this back over? How am I going to turn the tide of 5 years of building this company, building this brand, and bam, it's gone in a month. It was really, really difficult. So if you are on the selling side, I would just make sure that there are some parameters, that you have some metrics if things don't go well. Now we're all better, we're friends now, so this is all good. But it was a very rough, very, very rough 6 months.
Yeah, I'd add similar problems with the people. I mean, that's probably one of the most important. And so, as Steve hit about engaging them, the key, I'd say leaders of the company as early as possible in the process. And then having a clear communication cadence when you're pulling the team in so they find out first. So kind of respecting the hierarchy and looping everyone in. But the one that sticks with me, it was kind of along those lines. It was more in the long-term space, but it's applicable here. But we acquired about 1,600 units in Northern California, and it was a guy had been running it for 40 years. I mean, he was hand delivering checks to owners. I mean, it was that kind of. So we're like, we got to keep him around. And oh Lord, we had to run him out of the building because he was undermining everything. And it was so well intended, but it was like 40 years he was set in his ways and did. And so we made him, a figurehead and just kind of paraded him out where we could to homeowners, but never have him involved in any of the operations again.
Whew. Yeah, the human aspect of it is
emotional.
Is a tough part, and emotional and great, but can be very challenging.
And no matter how diligent you are and how, what people say when they close, we found that 1 in 6 deals, something's going to blow up. And you just, if you're buying, you have to be prepared to potentially go into a crisis situation and try to salvage it. So You just have to be realistic. I mean, everybody here has hopes that everything they buy is going to work out well, but as we said, there's this human element. The owners, there may be skeletons that you find out, so to speak, or maybe they're emotionally difficult to deal with, kind way of saying. So yeah, you may have more challenges than you believe. But most of the time, the deals work out well. So, hopefully we can get better than those odds.
Yeah, there's not a vacation rental university or short-term rental university that all these owners went to and learned best practices on all of this stuff, from operational to financial to legal documents. So a lot of these groups, they all went to the school of hard knocks, just learning what worked for them. So definitely diligencing as much as possible, and then just being open that things will kind of not go straight, and being open is what we've seen. If anybody has any questions, feel free to put them in the Slido. I think that's how it works. Let's move over to actual customer acquisition cost in terms of organic versus inorganic. And if any of y'all, do y'all measure kind of just like a basic way, if you're buying a 100-unit company for $5 million, that would be like $50,000 a contract. How do y'all look at it organically by adding one homeowner at a time versus inorganically?
Well, I mean, we talked about a matrix, and that's one of the things we're looking at is, are the units growing? And we're looking at a couple-year period. Too much growth could be a warning sign, by the way. We've seen some deals, again, that we overvalued, where they just, we're taking contracts for the sake of contracts. So you want to see reasonable, steady gains, but if it's kind of irresponsible, that's a red flag that you may be buying a business that could topple. So be careful about that. Look, organic is something everybody in this room should be tracking. So what that means is you have how many units you have at the start of the year, you track how many units you lose, and then how many you gain. And in the case of a sale of a unit, that would be a loss, and if you regain it, it's a gain. So it would be net neutral. But the health of your business is going to be typically, if you're able to, realistically have a positive, single-digit gain. Some markets you can get double-digit. And what I would urge each of you is that units is probably the most deceptive thing to look at. You really want to look at revenue. So if you can start to pull back and take a look at revenue per unit, and historically what the revenue per unit, that's a much better gauge as to the health of the organization. Because if they're picking up a lot of studio units and things that are lower, and you're just looking at unit count, you could overpay for the wrong reasons. You want properties that are harder to acquire, they're stickier, and they produce more revenue.
All units are not created equal, that's for sure. Anybody else here? How do y'all look at organic versus inorganic? Or we can move on if y'all like.
Yeah, at least for me, organic is kind of the primary strategy. It's just natural health and growth, and see acquisition as complementary, because you can't rely on necessarily it's there, or you agree with where the valuations and the opportunity. But as Steve said, really well is, it's amazing. People look at a business and it has 20 homes, but their average home's kicking off $150,000. Those are premium properties going to do well, and versus the wrong metric of 50 properties, and it's the inventory that's painful, homeowners that are challenging, troubling location.
A painful lesson that we learned, unfortunately, we keep making mistakes, is people that brought on hotel-like inventory to pump up their numbers, and then
virtual units and tied together. Yeah.
It's hotels are not vacation rentals, as we learned. Even if they're turned in and treated like a vacation rental, they're still a hotel, and I would kind of not count those, because you're probably going to want to get rid of them, because they create a lot of guest service issues, and they pull down your whole Q score, which is really bad.
And operationally, if you're tied to some other physical, you have to have their key system. It can be troubling.
Yeah, be careful.
Cool. Let's move to some of these questions here. The first one looks great. In terms of when acquiring a company, what percentage of inventory churn is typical in a transfer, and knowing that all deals are incredibly nuanced? But Dooney, you want to talk about that?
I'll jump in. So it's really tough to say like inventory churn is because of a transfer. We don't even say that we've bought the company publicly. Sometimes the owners don't even, and it's the owner's decision. Sometimes they don't even tell the employees because nothing changes. They're still there day to day. So theoretically, 0% should be because of the sale of the company. We have seen over the last year some churn, and a lot of the churn is from home sale. That they actually sell the home because the homeowner is ready to. So we don't have specifically certain homes that have been lost for the most part, and this is a summary, because of diminished quality, or the brand stays the same, so that wouldn't be the case. So I'd say 3% every year is not because of a transfer of ownership, but I think that is kind of because of other reasons of the home is sold, or they themselves just want to try out a new management company.
So for us, we actually didn't have any churn, and part of the reason was that I was very intentional about this. So I sent an individual email to all of my owners. I didn't do a mass email, any of that kind of stuff. It was very individualized, and I called and talked to every one of them. So I wanted them to know they were going to be taken care of, and then we did Zoom calls, my executive director, myself, and then the folks that bought my business. We did Zoom calls with all of them. So just letting them know, hey, we are going to have this change, but we want you to stay. These are things that are going to happen. So you can not have churn if you're really, really intentional about it, and certainly you're going to have it, depending on what's going on in the market. But just know that there's always a way.
What Stephanie says the key is, if you are buying a company and you're retaining their brand and the key employees and most of the staff, you're going to have the least amount of churn. It's when, if you're doing a tuck-in, you may have more churn, but the economics are better, because does everyone understand what a tuck-in is? So you're in an existing market and you have an office and you have employees and you have management, and then a local company, maybe they're 50 or however many units, says they want to sell. You're going to just fold it into the large company. You're going to basically extinguish that brand. You're going to have more churn there, but you're going to make more profit because you're getting so much more synergies. So it does depend on what the acquisition is.
Yeah. And we see that go kind of hand in hand with contingencies and earnouts, and that's kind of why a buyer will put something on there, because there can be friction at a closing and during that transition period, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. So that's where a buyer will try to protect themselves a little bit from that. Sorry.
No, not too much to add. I think it is, a factor. Excuse me. Of buying well and transitioning well are kind of the two drivers, and there's variables at play. And in most of the instances, we're changing a brand, so it's similar, as Steve mentioned. There is that, what's different, and so if it can be managed there, where there's that personal outreach and you can kind of be shoulder to shoulder in that validation, that really does help quite a bit. And then really delivering on that, and we've seen, if you communicate regularly and you're really engaged and you have those leaders working with them and the staff still there, it's generally not a non-event, especially because that's the people they've been interacting with. So, there should be a lot of thought to maximize this, because you've paid a lot of money, you've put a lot of time into it to minimize that. And so if you're seeing high churn rates, you're not buying well or you're not transitioning well.
Agree. That's awesome. Let's move to the next question, which is kind of self-serving to me, so I love it. Do any of y'all want to talk about how do you find acquisition opportunities? You can't just, are they on Biz Buy Sell? Where do you find them?
We've utilized Jacobie's firm. I think several of us on this panel have. So Jacobie he's being modest, but he's a business broker. He typically represents sellers. And look, there's a benefit of using a business broker, because they can kind of professionalize the process, because it can be a very emotional process experience for the owner. So, definitely, brokers serve a useful function. And then, there's people where they come to us and they say, because of relationships, they'd like to sell to us. And then there's outbound efforts as well.
I think that covers all three. So yeah, conferences, kind of meeting people, networking and doing like proprietary, but then also there's some great business brokers in the industry. Jacobie being one of the best. So.
Thank you.
Only thing I'd layer on is, when we have local business development and individuals in markets, it's part of it, a part of the role too. It's meeting with the competitive set in the market, expressing that we have interest, because just warming up those opportunities. But totally agree with everything else said. And obviously your group does a great job in pulling it together. And then, as Steve mentioned, it just helps too when it comes from, if it is with a broker, there's a little bit of an intermediary, and there's also some priming and education of what this process is going to be, and it's not this complete adversarial relationship, and so it does help soften that transition, especially when someone's never gone through this. So that's where a broker is really beneficial.
That's great where you're talking about kind of nurturing the lead. I've seen various buyers and sellers that have had conversations and relationships for multiple years, going out to dinner when they're in market, meeting up for a drink or coffee, and it leads to an acquisition because that seller and buyer have built that rapport over many months, many years. So we see that sometimes as like the best deals actually that are win-win for all parties.
Well, and it's catching because it's a life change. It's, there's a health issue, or I'm just tired, and I went through peak season and I'm done. Like, you want to be there and top of mind when they're thinking about you. Like, okay, I got a great relationship. I trust.
I'm sure we all have a list of people who have communicated to us. Probably capital just doesn't make sense at this point in time, but we definitely have a list in the back of our mind of people that if we have cheaper capital or whatever, we can go out and buy them. It happens, right? They want a certain price, and they make it pretty clear they've got a good business, and you basically say, hey, look, here's what, in order to get that price, here's what you need to do. So you just have those conversations over time. They respect the dialogue, and those deals do happen. Like, a couple years later, they could happen.
Yep. Let's go to another question. This one might be answered relatively quickly. Are you open to a PM that doesn't revenue share with homeowners, but instead pays fixed rent? It takes the upside on commercial success, but also the downside risk. So this is similar to like a lease arbitrage or master lease type of business model. Anybody up here, are y'all acquirers of that type of business model?
We haven't, but not opposed if it's the right, but it's going to be discounted relative to, because it's just the predictability. That's how I'd view it.
Yep.
Yeah, we haven't done that master lease model, but know that it exists a lot out there. I know during COVID, that model got hit really hard, and a lot of businesses went out of operation. But think there's viable market need. So,
if you're buying, it's very risky, so you're going to discount it significantly.
Let's do one last one, and then we'll move over. How do you handle real estate owned by a company? Office building, warehouses, laundry facilities. Does anybody here like to acquire the actual real property? Do you prefer leases? Are you not interested at all?
We can buy it, we can lease it, whatever makes sense for the business. But we're flexible. We have different scenarios at each business.
We prefer to lease, but if the owner wants to sell, then it's part of the purchase price, right? So at assets, you're going to look at the vehicles, the laundry equipment, and come up with a fair market value. We much prefer to lease.
Cool.
Yeah, similar. It's great to have the leaseback structure, but it's got to make sense.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you all for attending. We appreciate it, and thank you to my esteemed colleagues over here.